The Unseen wasn't just another low-profile horror release. It was a collision of broken intentions, stitched together beneath the dim lights of a farmhouse that seemed to swallow every truth spoken inside it. What emerged in 1980 felt less like a film and more like a fragmented confession. Rewritten scripts, clashing egos, and a creature shaped by contradictions rather than design. Scenes were reshuffled until the story resembled a faded memory, something unstable and trembling at the edges. Why did a production this chaotic leave behind a mystery that only deepened with time? And what was the film trying to reveal through all that silence? These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about. The Unseen. Fact 1. The Unseen began as a story that no one could quite anchor. A screenplay that shifted shape the moment someone tried to pin it down. What started as a grounded thriller drifted into stranger territory each time new pages circulated. Early drafts leaned toward psychological dread, but producers kept nudging it toward monster-driven horror, hoping a tangible creature would make the film easier to sell. The director tried to hold the middle ground, torn between ambition and the fear of losing any coherent narrative. As rewrites piled up, scenes began contradicting one another, leaving actors unsure of their characters' motivations from day to day. Dialogue intended for emotional revelation suddenly appeared in moments meant for suspense, creating tonal collisions that no one had the time or resources to fix. What might have been a clean, structured film slowly became a mosaic of decisions that never fully aligned. Yet on screen, that confusion transformed into an eerie instability that critics later called unintentional brilliance. The odd truth is that the film's fragmented identity, born from mismatched intentions and rushed compromises, gave it a disquieting energy that could never have been crafted on purpose. Broken visions inadvertently shaped its most haunting strengths. Fact 2. The farmhouse chosen as the production's central location carried an atmosphere that neither scouting reports nor photographs hinted at. Once the crew settled in, they realized the building felt disturbingly alive. Floorboards groaned even when no one walked across them. Doors eased open despite being locked. Temperatures shifted unpredictably, producing sudden cold pockets that made night shoots especially unsettling. At first, everyone blamed the unpredictability on the house's age, but as equipment began malfunctioning, lights flickering, audio warping, cables falling without warning, crew members grew uneasy. Some refused to stay inside alone, claiming the silence felt too aware. The director seized the opportunity, encouraging actors to let the house's oppressive presence guide their performances, insisting that the structure itself could become an uncredited character. The tension crept into the final footage, visible in lingering glances and shaky breaths that were never rehearsed. When filming wrapped, the property owner remarked that the house had been quieter during production than at any time in years, a statement that puzzled the cast, who felt the opposite. The unsettling twist is that the house's unpredictable energy, whether supernatural or just psychological, left a more lasting imprint on the film than any scripted scare. Fact 3. The creature design underwent a metamorphosis that mirrored the film's troubled development, constantly reshaped by conflicting visions and practical limitations. Early concept art imagined something grotesque and heavily distorted, a figure built entirely around shock value. Later drafts softened the creature, suggesting a wounded, almost pitiable presence. The special effects team found themselves caught between these interpretations, adjusting molds and prosthetics even as scenes were being prepared. Budget constraints forced them to reuse materials, resulting in textures and seams that looked different each day, depending on lighting and camera angle. Rather than expose these inconsistencies, the cinematographer leaned heavily on shadow, crafting an environment where the creature appeared only partially formed, as if emerging from darkness rather than stepping fully into view. Actors filming scenes with it described an uncanny discomfort, not because of its appearance, but because what they couldn't see allowed their imaginations to run wild. The final on-screen form became an amalgamation of every abandoned idea, a being whose ambiguity made it simultaneously tragic and threatening. The twist is that the creature's most memorable qualities weren't designed. They surfaced from the production's inability to commit to any single interpretation, leaving the monster to inhabit a space between intention and accident. Fact 4. Creative tension didn't simply influence the unseen, it defined it, carving deep divides between the people shaping its identity. Producers demanded a clearer genre, pleading for straightforward horror beats that could be marketed easily. Meanwhile, The director aimed for something more fractured and atmospheric, determined to preserve a psychological undercurrent beneath the creature elements. Writers, caught in the middle, adjusted dialogue and tone day after day in response to whichever voice held sway that morning. This churn produced a script in perpetual motion, altering character arcs and shifting emotional stakes between scenes. Actors sometimes arrived on set to find their motivations transformed overnight, required to pivot without rehearsal. The resulting inconsistency should have derailed the entire film, but instead it manifested as a strange, hovering tension, a sense that every character was navigating emotional terrain that had just shifted beneath them. Viewers later described the film as unstable, dreamlike, even uncanny. The real irony is that these qualities emerged not from artistic strategy, but from unresolved conflict. The emotional dissonance woven through the story wasn't crafted, it leaked into the film from the battles fought behind the camera, giving the narrative an authenticity that polished productions rarely achieve. Fact 5. Much of the unseen's visual identity came from technical limitations that forced the crew to improvise solutions on the fly. With lights failing and power inconsistencies plaguing the location, the cinematographer relied heavily on practical sources already present in the farmhouse lamps, window slivers, the ambient glow of aging bulbs. These unpredictable lighting conditions created asymmetric shadows that stretched unnaturally across walls, often obscuring parts of the frame the team hadn't planned to hide. When dollies malfunctioned, the camera was lifted onto shoulders, generating a subtle, trembling movement that critics would later interpret as a stylistic choice. Even misaligned lenses and uneven exposures contributed to the film's grimy, haunted aesthetic. Throughout production, the crew grew accustomed to transforming mistakes into opportunities. Scenes that should have been reshot were kept because the accidents made them more unsettling. In post-production, the director insisted on preserving these imperfections, arguing they reflected the fractured reality of the story. What audiences interpret as deliberate artistry often came from necessity, and the twist is that the raw, improvised aesthetic, born from equipment failures and tight schedules, became the film's most cohesive visual element, unifying a narrative defined by chaos. Fact 6. The cast of The Unseen quickly learned that performing under constant narrative reshaping required more than skill. It demanded emotional resilience. Without stable character arcs to rely on, actors had to internalize shifting motivations that changed with each script update. Some days, a character's fear stemmed from external threat. Other days, the same scene required fear born from emotional trauma. This fluidity produced a palpable uncertainty in performances, an authenticity rooted not in method acting but in genuine confusion. Physical scenes further amplified stress. Stunts were sometimes introduced with little warning, requiring actors to execute demanding movements in confined spaces without the rehearsal time typical of larger productions. The tension behind the scenes seeped into their expressions, breathing patterns, and posture in ways the director recognized as gold. He pushed them deeper, urging them to embrace the instability rather than fight it. Though exhausting, the approach yielded performances that felt raw and immediate, as if each emotion had been mined directly from the actor's own anxieties. In retrospect, the cast admitted that the chaos blurred boundaries between acting and reacting, and in a twist that now defines the film's emotional power, that very blur became the element that anchored its unsettling human core. Fact 7. Night shoots transformed the farmhouse into something far more oppressive than anyone in the cast had anticipated. Once darkness settled over the property, the environment seemed to compress around them, as if the walls were drawing a slow breath. Actors reported subtle but unnerving sensations, shadows that lingered too long, distant thumps with no discernible source, a constant feeling of being watched from just beyond the spill of the lights. The physical exhaustion of late hours blurred their sense of reality, making ordinary sounds feel loaded with intent. One performer admitted she hesitated before entering certain rooms, convinced their atmosphere had shifted since daylight. The director saw their unease and quietly encouraged them to channel it, arguing that authentic fear would elevate the narrative more effectively than any creature effect. This approach worked, though at a cost. Performances took on a frayed quality, marked by jittery glances and breathless tension that critics later praised for their realism. What viewers often interpret as calculated suspense was, in many moments, the cast responding to an environment that genuinely unsettled them. And the twist is that the farmhouse's nightly transformation became a silent collaborator in the film, shaping emotions long before cameras rolled. Fact 8. The sound team faced challenges that defied technical logic, turning the farmhouse into an acoustic puzzle they struggled to solve. Rooms that should have echoed remained eerily quiet, while narrow hallways inexplicably amplified the faintest footsteps. Microphones captured distant creaks that no one present had heard in real time, forcing the crew to question whether the building itself was generating noises outside human perception. Attempts to control the environment, including padding walls and sealing windows, made little difference. Dialogue often vanished into the structure, requiring actors to redub entire scenes weeks later, a process that risked losing the emotional immediacy of their performances. Yet the mismatched audio inadvertently contributed to the film's disorienting soundscape. Certain scenes feature noises that seem to drift from impossible directions, creating an auditory instability that mirrors the story's themes of hidden truths. Critics later celebrated the film's uncanny use of silence and ambient sound. Unaware of the constant struggle behind the scenes to capture anything usable, the twist is that the film's most memorable sonic elements, those faint reverberations and misplaced echoes, were not intentional design choices. They were the building's own unpredictable voice, captured accidentally on tape. Fact 9. The performer behind the film's hidden inhabitant endured an intense and often contradictory creative process, shaped by constant script revisions that redefined the creature's identity. On some days, he was instructed to play the character as a feral being driven by instinct alone. On others, he was guided toward portraying a misunderstood figure shaped by years of isolation. This shifting directive forced him to develop a fluid physical language, lurching movements blended with sudden moments of childlike caution, expressions that flickered between menace and vulnerability. The prosthetics added further complications. Heavy, restrictive, and prone to tearing, they limited his visibility and range, requiring him to rely on peripheral motion and intuition during action sequences. Yet these limitations resulted in a strangely compelling performance. What viewers interpret as emotional ambiguity was often the actor navigating physical discomfort and unclear direction. Fellow cast members remarked that acting opposite him felt unpredictable, as if the creature's behavior shifted subtly with each take. This instability became one of the film's most distinctive traits, and the twist is that the creature's enduring impact, its unsettling blend of innocence and danger, emerged not from a unified vision, but from an actor trying to inhabit a character the script could never fully define. Fact 10. The creature's underground refuge, one of the film's most unsettling spaces, was not a planned set but an accidental discovery. During early location preparation, a crew member noticed a faint draft rising from beneath a warped corner of the floor. When the boards were pried open, they revealed a cramped, irregular chamber that had seemingly been untouched for decades. Rusted tools lay abandoned beside collapsing shelves, and the walls bore water stains that resembled distorted faces under dim light. The director immediately insisted they use the space, convinced its raw decay could not be replicated on a soundstage. Shooting there, however, proved punishing. The ceiling was so low that lights had to be handheld or wedged against beams, casting unpredictable shadows that constantly shifted across the actors' faces. The uneven ground caused repeated stumbles, tearing prosthetics and rattling nerves. Yet the footage captured an authenticity the crew hadn't expected. The oppressive geometry of the room forced the performers into cramped movements that felt instinctive rather than choreographed. What viewers often interpret as careful production design was, in truth, the house yielding a forgotten part of itself. And the twist is that the film's most atmospheric location wasn't created for horror, it simply existed, waiting to be found. Fact 11. Editing. The unseen became an ordeal defined by competing visions and mounting exhaustion. Early assemblies focused on suspenseful pacing, allowing scenes to simmer in silence before releasing tension. Producers, concerned the film felt too subdued, pushed for faster rhythm and more immediate scares. The director countered by arguing that emotional continuity was crucial, especially for a story built on secrecy and fractured relationships. These conflicting goals transformed the editing room into a battleground. Scenes were rearranged, trimmed, or expanded to satisfy alternating demands. Continuity became collateral damage as shots filmed weeks apart were forced together, creating tonal and visual shifts the editor struggled to smooth over. Yet something strangely compelling emerged from the chaos. Transitions felt abrupt but haunting, mirroring the psychological disorientation the characters experience. Viewers later described the film's rhythm as dreamlike, unaware that the effect stemmed from logistical compromise rather than artistic experimentation. The editor confessed that some of the film's most memorable cuts resulted from simple necessity sections that were incomplete or unusable were omitted entirely, leaving behind jagged edges that shaped the film's identity. The twist is that the instability woven through the narrative wasn't planned, it was carved out by limitations that inadvertently deepened the film's unsettling mood. Fact 12. The props that filled the farmhouse played a far larger role in shaping the film's emotional landscape than initially expected. The production team gathered items from estate sales and abandoned storage units, choosing objects that carried signs of wear, worn quilts, chipped furniture, faded photographs with indistinct faces. These pieces were not meant to be symbolic, yet the camera frequently lingered on them due to the tight framing required to hide technical issues. Their textures, imperfections, and quiet history softened the boundary between fiction and reality. Actors began interacting with the props instinctively, allowing their emotional responses to these objects to influence their performances. A cracked toy might evoke pity, while a fraying family portrait introduced tension into a dialogue scene. None of these choices were scripted, but they enriched the visual storytelling in ways no one predicted. Critics later argued that the props hinted at a generational pattern of neglect, reinforcing the film's themes. The twist is that the farmhouse's emotional weight was built unintentionally. The objects that now seem to speak for the story's past were simply leftovers from forgotten lives, lives that, in the film, found a second voice. Fact 13. One of the director's most deliberate yet invisible choices was his insistence that the family's history remain largely unspoken. Instead of outlining clear motivations or defining past traumas, he encouraged the cast to craft personal backstories they would never explicitly reveal. Each actor quietly constructed their own version of what had fractured the household: unresolved guilt, buried secrets, years of emotional erosion. These private narratives shaped gestures, pauses, and sidelong glances that added layers of tension to even the simplest interactions. Scenes that appeared straightforward on the page became charged with unarticulated meaning once actors infused them with the weight of their imagined pasts. The crew noticed that certain exchanges felt inexplicably heavy, even though the dialogue offered no clear explanation. Early test audiences, confused by the lack of explicit detail, described the film as emotionally fogged, but later, viewers recognized the ambiguity as one of its strengths. By refusing to provide definitive answers, the film allowed its characters to exist in a space defined by suggestion rather than certainty. And the twist is that the emotional resonance many fans attribute to subtext wasn't built into the script, it emerged from the actors' silent agreements to inhabit a story whose deepest wounds remained unspoken. Fact 14. A significant portion of the film's emotional nuance was lost when a key sequence involving the hidden inhabitant was removed during late-stage editing. The original cut included a quiet, extended moment in which the creature interacted with belongings it had, collected objects handled with surprising care, hinting at a desire for connection rather than violence. These fragments painted a portrait of loneliness that complicated the audience's perception of the character. However, producers feared the scenes softened the film too much, blurring the line between antagonist and victim. After heated debate, the entire sequence was cut, leaving only fleeting glimpses of the creature's inner world. Cast members who filmed the scene felt its removal stripped away an essential layer of humanity, and the editor later admitted that losing it permanently altered the film's tone. Still, echoes of the deleted moment linger. The creature's vulnerability remains perceptible in certain gestures, suggesting emotional depth beyond what the final cut reveals. The twist is that the scene's absence may have amplified its power. Its ghost lives in the negative space, shaping audience interpretation without ever being seen. Fact 15. The evolution of the film's score mirrored the broader confusion surrounding the production, shifting dramatically as creative priorities collided. Initial compositions were sparse and atmospheric, built around low, droning tones meant to evoke emotional decay rather than fear. Midway through scoring, however, producers demanded more aggressive musical cues, arguing that traditional horror stingers would heighten the film's marketability. The composer struggled to balance these competing demands, crafting pieces that oscillated between restraint and intensity, sometimes within the same track. During mixing, the director fought to preserve the quieter elements, believing that moments of near silence carried more psychological weight than anything an orchestra could deliver. Ultimately, a patchwork emerged, segments of minimalist dread stitched together with sudden bursts of musical violence. Critics at the time dismissed the score as inconsistent, but later audiences found its unpredictability strangely fitting. The music's fractured identity reflects the tangled emotional world of the characters, echoing the film's blurred lines between fear, sorrow, and confusion. And the twist is that the score's disjointed quality, once seen as a flaw, became an accidental mirror of the production itself, a soundscape shaped by competing desires that somehow found resonance in its own instability. Fact 16. The release of The Unseen became a study in miscommunication, as the marketing campaign never settled on what kind of film it was promoting. Posters leaned heavily into monstrous imagery, suggesting a creature-driven spectacle, while trailers emphasized psychological tension and the eerie disappearance of travelers. This tonal split confused early audiences, who walked into theaters expecting a straightforward horror film only to encounter something more fractured and ambiguous. Distributors, uncertain whether to target fans of exploitation cinema or slow-burn thrillers, offered minimal support, resulting in scattered screenings and inconsistent promotion. Critics reviewing these limited showings interpreted the film through whichever lens the marketing had suggested, leading to wildly differing assessments. Some dismissed it as an undercooked creature feature, while others praised its unsettling emotional undercurrents. Over time, however, viewers who discovered the film independently through late-night broadcasts or obscure video rentals approached it without preconceived expectations. They found themselves intrigued by its contradictions, its uneasy rhythm, its refusal to declare a single identity, and the twist is that the marketing failure that once buried the movie accidentally preserved its mystique, allowing it to be rediscovered not as a product of its era, but as a strange artifact waiting for the right eyes. Fact 17. The film's financial limitations shaped nearly every creative decision, quietly steering the production in ways that only became visible long after filming wrapped. With a budget stretched to its breaking point, the crew learned to operate in a state of perpetual compromise. Equipment that malfunctioned was rarely replaced. Instead, it was propped up, repaired with makeshift solutions, or abandoned entirely. Makeup teams extended the lifespan of prosthetics far beyond recommended limits, stitching and re-gluing pieces that should have been discarded. Wardrobe staff rotated costumes to hide wear and tear, subtly altering characters' appearances from scene to scene. Even meal schedules were affected, pushing cast and crew into long days sustained by minimal resources. Yet these constraints produced unexpected creative benefits. The rawness in the film's texture, the instability in its visual language, the tension in performances all emerged from a working environment defined by scarcity. What should have weakened the story instead amplified its sense of claustrophobia and desperation. The twist is that the production struggles didn't merely shape the film, they became embedded in its DNA. Viewers now feel that tension without necessarily knowing its origin, sensing the pressure that molded every frame. Fact 18. Debate surrounding The Unseen intensified over the years as scholars and horror enthusiasts grappled with the film's uneasy moral landscape. Some argued it exploited physical deformity, using the creature's condition as a shorthand for fear. Others claimed the narrative suggested a deeper tragedy, an examination of what happens when a family is built on secrecy, shame, and neglect. These conflicting interpretations were fueled by behind-the-scenes revelations, showing the creative team never fully aligned on the character's thematic purpose. Certain drafts portrayed the hidden figure as a product of cruelty and confinement, while others cast it as a menacing presence shaped by violent instinct. This unresolved tension seeped into the final film, leaving the creature suspended between victimhood and monstrosity, audiences found themselves torn between sympathy and revulsion, often shifting their perspective from one scene to the next. Over time, this ambiguity became one of the film's most hotly discussed qualities. Rather than offering simple answers, it forced viewers to confront uncomfortable questions about responsibility and the nature of horror itself. And the twist is that the film's lack of clarity, once seen as a storytelling flaw, proved its greatest strength, allowing the narrative to haunt audiences long after the credits fade. Fact 19. The Unseen's gradual rise to cult status was not driven by widespread recognition, but by scattered encounters, late-night channel surfing, forgotten VHS tapes tucked into rental store corners, and whispered recommendations among horror fans seeking something that felt genuinely off-kilter. These accidental discoveries became the film's lifeline. Viewers who found it without context were often struck by its fractured tone, its unnerving quiet, and its refusal to behave like a conventional creature feature. They sensed something buried beneath the rough edges, a sincerity, an emotional confusion, a strange vulnerability that made the film linger in memory. As online forums emerged decades later, scattered admirers realized they were not alone in their fascination, prompting new discussions about the film's mishandled release and misunderstood ambition. Critics revisiting the movie with fresh eyes began framing it not as a failed experiment, but as a rare example of horror shaped by creative conflict rather than formula. Scholars exploring overlooked cinema recognized thematic threads of isolation and generational secrecy that had once been dismissed as narrative inconsistency. The twist is that the film's survival never depended on the system that failed it. Instead, it thrived because viewers embraced the very imperfections that once condemned it, turning a nearly forgotten project into an enduring curiosity. Fact 20. What makes The Unseen so enduring is not merely its creature or its mystery, it is the way the film destabilizes the boundary between innocence and danger. As the story unfolds, the hidden inhabitant becomes increasingly difficult to categorize. Moments of tenderness clash with terrifying impulses, leaving viewers unsure whether they are witnessing the tragic outcome of confinement or the eruption of something inherently violent. This duality was never fully resolved by the filmmakers, many of whom held conflicting interpretations of the character's nature. Their uncertainty seeped into the script, shaping a narrative that oscillates between horror and sorrow without settling on a moral conclusion. Audiences are forced to navigate this ambiguity, projecting their own assumptions onto scenes that offer no definitive answers. Some see a creature shaped by cruelty, others see a force beyond redemption. This interpretive split fueled debates that continue decades after the film's release, and the twist is that the film's emotional impact comes precisely from what it withholds. By refusing to provide clarity, it compels viewers to confront their discomfort, questioning whether the true horror lies in the creature or in the human choices that created it. Bonus fact: among the film's most persistent rumors is one involving a supposed alternate conclusion, a sequence whispered about by crew members but never confirmed by any surviving materials. According to those who claim to have seen early drafts, the ending originally hinted at a presence even more deeply buried within the farmhouse than the creature audiences came to know. This version reportedly explored the idea of layered concealment, suggesting that the hidden inhabitant was not the only secret the family had suppressed. Some recollections describe faint movements behind walls during the climactic escape, while others insist the scene included a low, rhythmic knocking that grew louder as the camera drifted down a narrow hallway. Whether these moments were scripted, filmed, or entirely imagined remains unclear. What is certain is that the production team grew increasingly uneasy discussing them, with several insisting the sequence would have shifted the film from intimate horror to something far more existential. No footage of this rumored ending has ever surfaced, not in early assemblies, not in distributor archives, not in private collections. Fans searching for traces have found nothing except fragments of testimony that contradict each other. And the twist is that the absence of proof only intensifies the myth. The possibility of another unseen presence, one the film chose not to reveal, lingers like a shadow cast by a story that refuses to close all its doors. The Unseen lingers, not because of what it shows, but because of everything it chooses to leave in shadow. Its fractured emotions, tangled motives, and unanswered questions echo long after the final frame fades, Stories like this don't resolve, they seep into the imagination, reshaping themselves each time someone revisits the silence between its scenes. If one detail unsettled you more than the rest, tell us which one and share the next forgotten film you want us to uncover in the dark.